Welcome back, friends. Hello, Lou.
Hello, how are we doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm ready.
Yeah, so
Ready
today,
for the next case.
today we're going to be talking about a wealthy businessman who almost got away with the murder of his wife.
Okay, if you're new to Memoirs of a Psychiatrist, we're talking with a psychiatrist who worked very extensively in hypnotism, both in dealing with some illnesses and, in this case, solving some crimes. Actually get involved in solving some high-profile murder cases, actually, with the state police, with the local police. And these are public records. All of these are public records.
Yes.
And people are going to be interested in trying to dig up more information on some of these.
Yes, you can actually look these up in either the newspapers from that time, under, I think it's newspaper.com or newspapers.com, or each one of these cases went to court, so you could look up the court records. And this one, for instance, the name of the case is State versus Dreher. Dreher. That was the name of the defendant, last name, State versus Dreher.
And is Dreher the wealthy man who almost got away?
That's right.
Yeah.
So turns out that this was a murder that took place in Morris County. So it went on for years, the case.
Really?
Because this man and his father owned a leather tanning and a factory in Newark, New Jersey. Extremely wealthy family. And they ultimately used the law firm that defended Oliver North.
Oh.
And the first time, although the defendant was convicted of murder, on an appeal, he was let go.
Wow.
And he came out free, but then the prosecutor went back again, and they convicted him. One of the reasons for
did the prosecutor appeal the appeal, or were there actually two separate trials here?
I don't know the details. Because I wasn't in the first time. I think the reason the appeal came in, one of the reasons was they said that the witness who saw this came across with great confidence in the trial, and that swayed the jury to convicting Mr. Dreher.
That's kind of his job.
But they said that the confidence that the witness came out saying, I saw such and such, would not have been there had it not been for the hypnosis.
Oh, I see.
So therefore, the first court threw it out and said, okay, you can go, but the second court upheld it, because basically what they said was, whether it was from hypnosis, and all of this, as I said on a previous session, is documented with videotapes.
Yeah.
So it's not as if the hypnotist, or I in this case, put anything in this guy's mind. But we're ahead of ourselves. So I wrote down some dates, so I'm going to look down.
Sure.
On the day after New Year's Day in 1986, which was January 2nd, 1986, 3:32 p.m., the township of Chatham got a phone call from a Mr. John Dreher. And basically, he said, it's 3:30 in the afternoon. I live here with my two little kids, two sons, and my wife, and I just got into the house 3:30, and it looks like my house has been ransacked and burglarized. Now, that particular town, very affluent, very wealthy town, people have horses in the back stables, large areas you don't see from one house to the next. There's no murders.
Right.
So police actually didn't suspect that anything like this, even for much longer.
Right.
So 3:32, he calls, he says, my house has been burglarized, and the police said, okay, we'll be there. 5 minutes later, the police get another phone call, and the second phone call from Mr. Dreher says, hurry, I think my wife is dead. The police go immediately over, and he takes them into the basement, where they find the body of his wife, Gail Dreher. She's dead. Her lower part of her body is almost like prone, lying down.
Yep.
Her upper part of the body is tied with around her neck with a rope tied to a lolly column.
Yeah.
A lolly column is what they have in basements, holding up the ceiling.
Yep. Shores up the beams.
Shores up the beams.
Yep.
So her neck is tied there. Her hands are tied behind her back. She's got a number of bruises all over her face and body. Her hands are tied behind her back. She's got 12 stab wounds.
Ooh.
Her face has been battered. Her lips, her ears, her nails were blue from the strangulation. And the cause of death was found to be strangulation. The police went upstairs into the master bedroom, second floor, and there were signs of an intrusion. It seemed like the perpetrator had come in through the bedroom. The jewelry boxes were all on the floor. There was no jewelry left there.
Mm-hmm.
And you will find that probably the undoing of this murderer was the fact that he had to come back because he thought he forgot some jewelry in the basement. So the jewelry boxes were undone. The bed was all messed up. The whole room, the furniture was on the floor,
Right.
looked like a mess. So the first impression was, because the husband seemed very distraught, the first impression was this was an outside burglar who had come into the house, found the wife there, and then killed her. The time of death was thought to be around 9 o'clock in the morning. They asked Mr. Dreer, where were you? And he says, I leave the house around 7:30 in the morning.
Right.
I take my kids, my two kids, I drop them to school, I meet my father, and then around 9, and then we both go to work. His father lives down the street from him.
Mm-hmm.
So they checked his story, and this is the part where where the hypnosis comes in. Employees at work said, oh yeah, he was here between 9 and 10. So they said, if that's the case, then, its story doesn't really fit together from what
Right.
they had in terms of a timeline. Turns out later, and I'm jumping back and forth,
Yep.
they found that from the hypnosis that we found out, the newspapers said that Mr. Dreer went to work at 7:30 in the morning, and the murder took place sometime between 9 and 10 in the morning, and he hadn't come back until 3:30 in the afternoon.
Right.
And the guy across the street, a Mr. Austin Lett came to the police. He says, I hate to do this. He says, because I don't really remember very clearly, but it was January 2nd, and I seem to have a feeling that I saw Mr. Dreer come back to his house around that time, 9 o'clock or so.
Right.
So the police said, are you sure? He says, no, I'm not sure. That's why I came to you. I don't know.
Yeah.
Would you be subject to, would you allow yourself to be subjected to hypnosis? He said, sure. So he comes to my office, again with the state versus herd guidelines. I have video cameras there. Thank goodness, because everything was videotaped before and after the hypnosis. I asked him before hypnosis, what do you remember? He says, I remember nothing. I don't remember anything. I just have a feeling that that Mr. Dreer was there at 9:30. So I hypnotize him, and under hypnosis, I said, go back to January 2nd. And he said, I said, tell me what you remember. He says, it's January 2nd. There's a big, like a Christmas tree, or these evergreens, that has to be moved from the front of my yard.
Oh.
He says, and
Which is why he's paying attention.
Which is why I'm paying attention to the clock. He says, everybody who lives on this block is quite wealthy. He says one of the jokes that we tease each other about is we look to see what time did you go to work. And we say, you must be lazy because you didn't go to work till 12 o'clock that day.
I see, yeah.
Or you didn't go to work at all that day. So we tease each other. He says, I was afraid of being teased because it was past 9 o'clock and I don't, still had to wait for these landscapers.
So there's a precedent of these people kind of keeping track of people coming and going.
Correct.
Yeah.
So he says, I'm looking at the clock to see when are these guys coming. They're late. And I'm looking at the clock, looking at the tree, looking at the clock, looking at the tree. He says, and you usually cannot see from my house all the way into Mr. Dreer's house, which is across the street from him. But he says you can see the gate which is an electronic gate that opens. You can see the gate and you can see cars coming in there. So he says, I see the gate opening and I see a car pull up. And he said, if this gate is opening and he's coming back, he must have left early in the morning. And that was what happened. He left at 7:30, Mr. Dreer.
Yes.
Came back at 9:30 or 9 o'clock, whatever that time was, killed his wife. And I said, how do you know it's Mr. Dreer? He says, I know his car. I said, can you see him? And he said, wait. And I said, focus through the rear window. He says, yes, I see him. I've seen his salt and pepper hair. And all of this is in the court record,
right,
word to word, because it was hypnotized. It was videotaped under hypnosis, and his comments were read back in the court. He says, I see his salt and pepper hair, and I see the profile of his face as he stops near the gate. He says, I know it's Dreer. And I said, look at the clock, tell me exactly what time it is. He says, it's 9:35. Now, employees at work said he was at work at 9 o'clock. Dreer's defense attorney, who was the same one who his team defended Oliver North.
In the Iran-Contra hearings, yeah.
Yep. He said it normally takes about 45 minutes to go from work. So if he said 9:35, there's no way he could have gone there, because he was there at 9 at work. And then he had photographs or a camera at the bank that showed he was at the bank at 10. So he says, how could he have been at work at 9, at home at 9:35, and then at the bank at 10?
Right.
So all of this was proven because it was January 2nd, there was less traffic. And with no traffic, you can make it between 15 minutes from work to home. And apparently what he had done is gone to work, showed his face, got in the car, raced back home, did the evil deed, got in the car, rushed back to the bank where he knew he would be photographed.
He was setting an alibi.
Yeah. So turns out later,
I wonder if he planned it for January 2nd to take advantage of the traffic. I wonder if that was part of his thinking.
Not so.
Yeah.
Turns out that there was a woman involved.
Oh.
And Mr. Lett then
always
saw Mr. Lett then saw under hypnosis the woman come in a separate car. The woman turned out to be a salesperson who was in Colorado selling timeshares. And she had met Mr. Dreer a few years prior to the murder in El Paso, Texas, at a bar. Mr. Dreer and she had struck up a conversation and then a romantic relationship that went on from that time on.
All right.
And so Mr. Dreer then frequently went to Colorado or various places where she was,
right,
and the two of them would meet, and then she fell in love with him. He first met her in March of 85, if I'm not mistaken. The murder took place in January of 86. In October of 85, she left her home in Chicago and moved to Chatham to be next to Dreer at his request.
Yes.
At some point prior to this, Dreer said to her, look, I'm worth a lot of money. If I get a divorce, a lot of my wealth is going to go to my wife.
Right.
I want you to have it. I want us to have it. I want us to get married. What do you think if I killed her? And this woman, I think her name was Nancy, said to him, you're crazy. But he kept persevering, and she bought into the idea of murder.
Yeah.
He then said, don't you have a gun? You said you had a gun. She says, I do. It's in Chicago. And he said, next time you fly here, would you bring the gun with you? And she said, sure. So she brought the gun, and he said, why don't you meet me one day at such and such a place? Don't bring it to my office. Don't bring it to my home. Don't bring it anywhere else. I'll meet you at such and such a place, and I'll take the gun from you. She was waiting at the spot that he had marked on a map, and then she saw his car coming, and he just drove past without even looking at her. She was surprised, but then he told her later that his dad had at the last minute said he wants to ride with him. His dad was in the car, so he couldn't stop and take the gun from her.
Yeah.
And on January 2nd, he had told her prior to this that Christmases were really bad for him, that his wife gave him a real hard time around Christmas and New Year's. And on January 2nd, he called her and said, yesterday, New Year's Day, was horrible for me. My wife made it miserable. I cannot stand her. Today's the day I'm going to do it. And she said, and he said, would you please meet me at the house at like 7:30 in the morning after I dropped the kids, or sorry, 9:30 in the morning. So she showed up. He said, come dressed as if you're in your best. I want to introduce you to my wife as the other woman.
Wow.
So she got dressed up.
The day he's going to kill her.
Yes. He says,
wow.
She got dressed up, not having any idea that he was going to kill her. Goes there. He told her where to go, how to open the garage door, put the car inside so nobody sees it. And then she comes out from the garage into his room, and he's standing at the steps going down into the basement.
Right.
And he says, move, just move. And she's surprised because his tone, his affect, his face is very pressured.
Yeah.
And she said, what happened? And she hears from the basement a voice of a woman screaming and saying, please, please, do whatever you have to, don't hurt me.
Yeah.
And so she's panicked. Nancy's panicked because she hears Gail saying this. She doesn't know what to do. She's afraid of going down there because she doesn't know what she's going to see. And then Dreer says to her, come down here. And she doesn't want to go. She goes down. She sees the body of this woman tied up, choking, bleeding, hurt from multiple blows that she has suffered on her head, face, etc., where Dreer has been punching her. And she gets sick to her stomach.
Yeah.
So she runs upstairs to go to the bathroom and doesn't want to come back. And he yells to her, he says, come down, I need help. I need something sharp, a knife, a scissors, something. So she gets a knife from the kitchen. She goes back down. She's sickened by the sight. She can't even bring herself to go there. She takes the knife and throws it to Dreer. It's on the floor. He's now taking this rope, and he's got it around his wife's neck, and he's pulling it against the lolly column to choke her.
Yeah.
And now he holds that rope with one hand, reaches down, grabs the knife, reaches up to his wife, and starts stabbing her in the neck.
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
When she sees this, Nancy gets sick. She goes upstairs to throw up again. He then tells her, you got to come down. You have to have a hand in this also. So she comes down. She can't bring herself to go near the body at that time. But then they think that the wife is dead, but they go upstairs to the bedroom. And he says, let's make this look like a burglary. So they start tossing furniture down. They take the jewelry. He says the jewelry has to disappear. Takes a pillowcase, puts all the jewelry in the pillowcase, tells Nancy to take it, but don't sell it, don't use it, throw it in the garbage somewhere.
Right.
So she takes all the jewelry. He then goes down and says, let me get out first, and then you give it enough time, and then you leave. So in the meantime, he says, go and hit my wife over the head with something. So she takes an instrument that I don't know what exactly it is, and she hits the wife over the head with this, and she hits it 3 times, and it left like a crescent-shaped mark on her head.
Yeah.
Goes all the way straight down to the bone, bleeding.
Yeah.
And she throws the weapon down.
She's not dead at this point.
Doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
And then she says she quickly gets into the car, and she takes the weapon, takes the knife, puts it in the pillowcase, and gets in her car and disappears. 10 minutes to 9, she calls Dreer, and the conversation, as the police see it in the records, lasts for 10 minutes. And Mr. Dreer says...
I'd love to hear that conversation.
Yeah. He says, it's all going to be okay. And so he said, did you get the jewelry? And did you dispose of it? She said, yes, I did. He said, did you get the knife? Yes, I did. Did you get rid of it all? Yes, I did. Did you pick up the earrings that I had left on the pool table? And she said, what earrings?
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oops. did you get the earrings? She says, no, I didn't know that they were earrings. He says, no, I took the earrings out because a burglar would have had to take the earrings out. I took the earrings out and left them on the pool table. You didn't see them? He said, no, I didn't see them. He says, okay, don't worry, I'll go back and get them. So he had to go back, as he said in court, for 3 reasons. One was to get the earrings. Second, the dogs had been let out. He wanted to let the dogs back in because it was cold, January 2nd. He had to let the dogs back into the house. And the third...
Okay, he just murdered the wife. He's worried about the dog.
Yeah. The third reason, he said, was to kick the body to make sure it was dead.
Oh, wow.
So he goes back. Austin Lett sees him at 9:35. He goes inside, kicks the body, takes the earrings, lets the dogs in, and then leaves again and makes it to the bank by 10 o'clock.
Wow.
The state tries to convict him. The first time he's convicted, but then let go on appeal. The state then offers Nancy a deal and says, if you testify and you tell us all this, then we'll let you go free. So she did.
Yes.
She took the deal. She testified. She said everything that happened, just as I said it just now. He ends up in jail. The second time he's again convicted. I believe he's still in jail. It's been over 50 years now. Mm-hmm. And she's been free the whole time.
Nancy's been free.
Nancy's been free. Yeah. So these are the things that, between our sessions we had talked about. I said how these things come about, where one witness sees something, sees a license plate or doesn't remember it, or Mr. Lett happens to be worried about somebody teasing him for leaving for work.
Right.
At still 9:30, you're home.
And his Christmas tree is leaving.
Christmas tree, and he's looking outside because his landscapers are late, and he sees something. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened in this case.
How often is hypnosis being used in this period for testimony in this?
When I was doing it, at that time in the 80s and 90s, I was called very, very frequently. The Exxon kidnapping, the top person in Exxon was kidnapped. They were asking for a $5 million ransom. I was called for that. Lincoln Center, there was a person that had gone to see a show with her husband. She went out in the intermission to go to the bathroom, and her body was found in the elevator shaft. And I had to hypnotize many, many people just to see what they found, and we found the perpetrator that way. So at that time, we were using it quite a bit.
You were using quite a bit. Were there other people doing this as well?
I had not heard of that.
Yeah.
I had not heard of anybody since then, and then I sort of backed off after a while.
Because it seems like a terrific tool. It seems...
I mean, look at the number of cases that would not have been solved if these witnesses hadn't come forward and hadn't been hypnotized. Don't get me wrong. There were many cases that we could not solve. One of the things that sticks in my mind was a little girl who was kidnapped. At that time, these vans had just come into vogue where they had the side entrance.
Yes.
When I first came here in the 70s, all the vans had rear entrances.
Right.
They didn't have side entrances. When the side entrances came, this little girl was walking down the street with her friends going home from school. And the friend said, this van came right up to us. We were on the sidewalk, and the side door opened, and we're looking inside, and an arm comes out. We're on the sidewalk.
Yep.
This is in a city in New Jersey. And the arm comes out, grabs this little girl, pulls her inside, the door closes, and the van goes off.
Yeah.
And I hypnotized those little girls. They were not hypnotizable. I tried anybody else that might have seen anything, and we never got that.
Yeah.
So
to this day, they still warn women about those vans.
Yeah. There are a few that we never got. But you're right. We used hypnosis quite a bit at that time. But I don't know whether they're using it now. Or the medical things that I describe in the first couple sessions of Memoirs of a Psychiatrist, where we use it for asthma, ulcerative colitis, migraine, stuff like that.
Conditions where the minds have a great influence.
Correct.
Yeah.
I wish people would use it now. And that's mainly the purpose of these sessions, is to get people to start reviving hypnosis for themselves.
That's what we're going to talk about going forward on Memoirs of a Psychiatrist. So what's next for Session 7?
Well, Session 7, what I'd like to talk about is how I helped many, many people with opiate addiction.
very hot subject.
Yes.
And opiate addiction, this is back how far ago?
The first time I treated somebody successfully with it was in 1996.
Yeah.
So about 20 years ago.
Yeah. But very timely now. Obviously, we have all kinds of problems with opiate addiction.
Yep. So that's what we'll talk about next time.
All right.
And I thank you all for joining me. Hope you enjoy these shows. I would really appreciate your comments. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. Give me some suggestions. Any feedback you could give me would be most helpful.
If you've stumbled across this, the Facebook page is Memoirs of a Psychiatrist, and find our sessions, whatever we've done at this point. I'm not sure where you're watching this. Obviously, it's a podcast. You can watch it at any time, but there's plenty of podcasts left over there, so check it out. And as the doctor said, leave a comment. And we'll talk to you in the next session.
Thank you.